The dust out near Redemption Creek tasted like judgment, and for 20 long years, Lorna Quinn had been swallowing it. The preacher's daughter ghost, in a sun-faded calico dress, was invisible to the godly and easy prey for the cruel. But on the day the sky turned to brass and the wolves began their dreadful howling, that ghost picked up a rifle. What she found wasn't a coyote or bandit, it was a man betrayed by his own and hunted by hers. An Apache warrior bleeding into the Texas dirt. What she did next would cost her everything, her home, her name, even her soul. She saved him, and in doing so she never imagined he'd be the one to save her in return. Out here in West Texas, the wind don't whisper, it scrapes. It clawed at the bare wood of First Grace Chapel, rattling the lone pane of glass in Lorna Quinn's bedroom window. At 20 she looked older, not from the sun, but from years under the heavy judgmental gaze of Redemption Creek. Being the preacher's daughter in a town of 53 folks wasn't a blessing, it was a cell. Her father, Gideon Quinn, was a man chiseled from stone and brimstone. Her mother, Saya, had once been softness, gentle smiles, and healing hands, who taught her the power of wild herbs, yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain. But Saya died of lung fever 10 winters back, and with her went every trace of warmth from the house. Gideon, hollowed by grief, saw sin in every shadow. Idleness is the devil's workshop, Lorna. Read your scripture. And she did. But her true devotion lay in the brittle leaves she stored in wooden boxes beneath her cot. Her solitude wasn't just emotional, it filled the room. When she walked to the mercantile, folks fell silent. The chatter stopped like someone had cut the wind. Their silence rang louder than any insult. They saw her lowered gaze, her patched dress, and the far-off look she gave the plains. Touched in the head, some whispered. May Stroud, the sharp-tongued shopkeeper, had said it plain enough for Lorna to hear just the Sunday prior. She's got her mama's weak constitution and her daddy's moods. No man will ever take her. You mark my words. But one man had other ideas. Rourke Calder. Not the decent old shop owner, but his brute of a nephew, sharing the name, but not the kindness. Rourke was a cattleman, thousands of steers, 10,000 acres of dust, and a temper like summer lightning. Thick-necked, broad-shouldered, he smelled of tobacco sweat and entitlement. He didn't see Lorna as a woman, just a transaction. A preacher's daughter would lend him a sheen of respectability. Mrs. Lorna, he'd muttered yesterday, cornering her by the pickle barrel. His voice too close, his eyes too sure. My ranch could use a woman's touch. Your daddy thinks this union's got potential. The idea of his hands on her made her stomach turn. Caught between her father's cold sermons and Rourke's looming shadow, Lorna packed her basket and fled. Not for good, not yet, but far enough. Tucked beneath the herbs and canvas cloth lay her father's forbidden hunting rifle. He'd always said a woman's hands are meant for prayer, not percussion. But Lorna had learned in secret, in silence, and she was a dead shot. She walked miles beyond the town's edge, across the arroyos, and into canyon country. The sky beat down in pale brass. She was following a trail of comfrey she'd marked the week before when she heard it. Not the high yip of a lone coyote. This was deeper, rough. A wolf's howl, then another. Then another. A pack. Lorna froze. She was too exposed. She scrambled up a rocky rise, heat wavering in the air. Down below in a dry riverbed the shadows moved. 6 no 7 gray ghosts circling, and in the middle a man. He knelt, clutching a broken arrow shaft like a spear. His long black hair clung to his face, blood-matted and soaked. His buckskins were torn, chest and arms streaked with crimson. A huge wolf lunged. The man jammed the shaft into its throat. The beast fell twitching, but another took its place, tearing into his thigh. The man let out a roar, not fear, defiance. But he was fading fast. He swung wildly, staggered back. In Redemption Creek they'd call this justice. To them, he was a heathen meeting his fate. Gideon Quinn would call it divine will. Rourke Calder would have skinned the wolves and called it a good day. But Lorna saw something else, a man being ripped to pieces. Her palms slick with sweat, she reached for the rifle, pulled it from the basket barrel, hot from the sun, and took aim. The barrel burned beneath her palms, heated through by the sun. Lorna Quinn steadied the weight of the rifle against the stone, her heartbeat slamming so hard against her ribs it felt like pain. The seventh commandment surfaced unbidden. "Thou shalt not kill," her father's voice. Gideon Quinn's rang sharp and absolute inside her head. A wolf leapt for the man's throat. Lorna drew a breath and sighted down the barrel. She did not aim at the wolf. She aimed for the rock just ahead of it. The shot cracked the air open. Lead struck stone, sparks and shards exploding outward with a shrill, screaming whine. The canyon echoed like it had been split in two. The wolves scattered, stunned by the sudden thunder, yelping and scrambling over one another. Lorna worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again, this time into the dirt at the feet of the pack leader. That did it. The pack broke and vanished into the canyons, leaving one gray body behind. Silence rushed in, thick and crushing. Lorna stayed where she was, shaking hard. Gunpowder stung her nose. Below in the arroyo, the Apache warrior looked up not toward the fleeing wolves, but straight at her. For one long second, he held himself upright. Then his strength failed. He collapsed face first into the blood-soaked dust. Lorna waited, counting her breaths. 1 full minute passed. He did not move. He's dead, she thought, relief and regret tangling tight in her chest. She should leave. She should go home. She should run. Then her mother's voice, Saya's, faint and nearly forgotten, whispered through her memory. "Yarrow for bleeding." Lorna slung the rifle over her shoulder and climbed down the rocks. He was not dead. Up close, his breathing rattled wet and shallow. Wolf bites tore across his thigh and shoulder, raw and mangled. But there was more. Higher on his ribs, she saw it, a dark puckered hole crusted with blackened blood. A bullet wound. Days old. It burned with infection, heat radiating through his skin. Fever had him lost somewhere far away. Even broken and bloodied, he was striking broad shoulders, sharp features, a strength that refused to fully leave him. "Vecto!" He whispered the name, slipping from poisoned lips. Then his eyes rolled back. Lorna's thoughts raced. If she left him, he would be dead before sundown. Wolves or infection would finish the job. If she rode for help, who would come? The town sheriff, Bart Johnson, would clap him in irons and hang him by morning. Rourke Calder would shoot him where he lay. Her father would pray over the body, but only after the fact. There was no one else, only her. She tore strips from her petticoat vanity, her father would call it, and pressed them tight against the worst of the wounds. She needed water. She needed shelter. The old line shack came to mind. 2 miles north, tucked deep in a box canyon, her mother once called the quiet place. It had belonged to a failed ranch, years ago, abandoned, forgotten. No one went there. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice trembling. He did not answer. "Please," she whispered to the unconscious man. "You can't die here." Somehow, fueled by panic and a defiance she barely recognized, Lorna hooked her arms beneath his and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, dead-weight muscle and bone. She dragged him. It took hours. 10 feet, then rest. 10 more lungs, burning arms, screaming. The sun beat down, sweat blinding her. The man moaned a low, animal sound that pushed her onward. By the time she reached the canyon, her hands were split and bleeding. Her dress was soaked with his blood. The line shack leaned like it was ready to give up. Half the roof had collapsed, but the portion braced against the canyon wall still stood. Inside it reeked of dust rot and pack rats. It was shelter. She dragged him into the darkest corner and laid him on a bed of old brittle hay. For the next 2 days, Lorna Quinn lived 2 lives. By daylight, she was the obedient daughter sweeping the chapel, mending Gideon Quinn's socks, enduring May Stroud's sharp-eyed questions at the mercantile. "Well now," Lorna May said, eyes lingering on her scratched hands. "You look pale. Buying all this salt planning to cure a hog for jerky," Lorna murmured, adding far more supplies than she needed, along with a precious bottle of laudanum from Rourke Calder's stock. "And you were out on the prairie again, weren't you?" a voice cut in. Rourke lounged by the door, watching her. "Trace Givens, my foreman, saw your tracks. You wander too far, Lorna. It ain't safe," he continued, gaze lingering where it didn't belong. "A woman needs protection." A chill ran through her, colder than any winter wind. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Calder." Lorna Quinn's voice was steady, but her skin crawled under his gaze. "Can you? Now?" Rourke Calder smirked, but it was a smile without warmth. There was menace under his charm, and Lorna felt it like a snake coiled just beneath her boots. She said nothing more. The moment she was free, she'd vanish. Her basket held no herbs that day, only stolen supplies. A hunk of bread, a strip of salted beef, the laudanum she'd bought under scrutiny. Her heart hammered as she raced back to the line shack, breath tight in her chest, fear snapping at her heels like wolves. Inside, the Apache warrior was burning with fever. He thrashed violently, caught in a storm of pain, calling out in a voice like falling stones, guttural, strange, half-mad. Lorna was afraid, but she was also Saya's daughter. She mixed laudanum with water and forced it between his cracked lips. Anything to ease the agony and drag him into sleep. She boiled water and cleaned his wounds, gagging at the smell of rot rising from the bullet hole near his ribs. The lead was still inside, she was sure of it. She stayed beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, watching his chest rise and fall with shallow, labored breaths. In his fever, he mumbled names Mochka over and over like a curse. Then another, softer, Alani. It cracked something open in her chest. On the third night, the fever broke. Lorna had drifted off against the rough wall, exhaustion catching up to her. She awoke with the feeling of being watched. His eyes were open, dark, sharp, no longer clouded by delirium. He was staring at her, unblinking, his gaze intense and aware. She gasped and scrambled back, startled. He tried to rise, hand reaching automatically for a weapon that wasn't there. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the clean bandages, the bowl of water, the emptied skin beside him. His expression was hard suspicion laced with pride. He didn't speak. Lorna's voice trembled. "I found you. The wolves." She gestured toward the door. "I helped." Still he said nothing. The silence pressed in around them. "My name is Lorna," she offered softly, pressing her hand to her chest. He watched her for a long moment. His body was weak, but he wasn't broken. He was coiled tight, a spring ready to snap. Finally, his gaze shifted. Just a flicker. He winced, reaching for his side. "Tavak," he rasped. "No Kayel." The fragile truce inside that run-down shack was built on need and slow, uncertain trust. Kayel was a man of silence. He sat for hours, leaning back against the wall, unmoving, always watching. He studied the way Lorna moved, careful, quiet, as if the world might shatter beneath her steps. They barely spoke, but the cracks in the language wall began to show. "Water," she would say, offering the skin. He'd mimic the word, unsure on his tongue. "Water." "Bread," she'd offer. He'd nod. "Bread." He pointed up one evening. "Tavi, son," she replied. Then he pointed to himself. "Kayel." She repeated it, tasting the name. "Kayel. Your name means son." He nodded, and a flicker of something near a smile crossed his lips. It softened him. She saw then, beneath the pain and the scars, he was still young. He watched everything. She learned his signs: a snap and slash for wolf, a two-finger motion for horse, a clenched fist for danger. He pointed at his wound, then mimed a snake striking. Vecto, the one who shot him. Lorna in turn found herself speaking, really speaking. Her voice spilled in confessions he couldn't understand, and that made it safe. "My father," she whispered one afternoon as she rubbed salve across his shoulder. "He's not a cruel man. Just lost." She paused, swallowing. "Since my mother passed, I've become a disappointment to him. I'm not holy enough, not obedient enough, not enough of anything." Kyle didn't understand the words, but the rhythm of pain needed no translation. He watched her eyes, steady and silent. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His hand brushed the scratch across her cheek, the one left by Rourke Calder's ring when he grabbed her at the Mercantile. His thumb barely touched it, but his meaning was thunder. "He hurt you," Cale said, not as a question. His voice was low, cold. A new light entered his eyes. "He's a powerful man," Lorna whispered, pulling back slightly. "Rourke Calder. He wants to marry me." Cale's hand clenched into a fist. He looked at his leg, still bound and stiff. Frustration burned across his features. He was a warrior reduced to lying still helpless. And outside that canyon, the tension in Redemption Creek was tightening like a rope ready to snap. Rourke Calder had grown bolder. He no longer bothered with subtlety. He'd gone straight to Reverend Gideon Quinn, formally asking for Lorna's hand. "He's a pillar of this town." Lorna, her father, said that evening, voice stiff with conviction as they sat across the table in brittle silence. "He's wealthy, well-regarded, and God-fearing. You'll never want for a thing. I don't love him." "Father," Lorna replied, her voice trembling, "love Gideon." Quinn slammed his palm on the table, so hard the tin plates jumped. "Love is foolishness. What you'll have is duty. What you'll have is security." His voice dropped cold and final. "This is not a request. The wedding will be in 1 month." Lorna couldn't breathe. Her throat locked with dread. She fled the table that night, not just in body, but in purpose. Her visits to the shack were no longer just about keeping Kyle alive. They'd become her salvation. But where could she go? Whispers in town were growing louder. Her trips were too frequent, too long. More food missing off the Mercantile shelves. And Trace Givens Rourke's cold-eyed foreman had started tailing her at a distance. He hadn't found the shack, not yet, but he knew she was going into the canyons. She's meeting someone, Mr. Calder, he'd told his boss. Or she's got herself some secret hidey hole. Always heads to the same patch of rock. Rourke's jealousy, already festering, twisted into something darker. He was sure there was a rival. Maybe that young blacksmith's apprentice, Jace Harlan, the boy who once dared offer Lorna a shy smile. Rourke had already seen to it that Jace got roughed up for that. If it was someone else, he wouldn't be so merciful. "Find it, Trace," he ordered, voice flat as flint. "Find what she's hiding." Danger was circling close. But in that dusty, half-fallen shack, something else was rising. Lorna had brought Kyle one of her father's shirts. It was too tight across his shoulders, the seams pulling over his broad chest. As he tugged it on, his hand brushed hers. The touch was small, but it stopped time. Both froze. It was the first time they'd touched, not as wounded and caretaker, but as man and woman. Lorna flushed, her cheeks burning crimson. But Kyle didn't pull away. He met her gaze steady, dark, unreadable, and searched her face. He saw her fear, and something else. Loneliness. The same kind that haunted him. He was an exile, and in her own quiet way, so was she. He lifted his hand, scarred and calloused, the same hand that had fended off wolves, and gently traced the line of her jaw. "Lorna," he said, her name rasped like wind across dry stone. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. She didn't flinch, didn't flee. She leaned in ever so slightly, and a single tear, 10 years in the making, escaped down her cheek. Kyle brushed it away with his thumb. They both knew then this wasn't about rescue anymore. It was something far more dangerous. The bullet was still lodged in him. The wound had scabbed over, but the infection clung to him, rising with the night. "It must come out," Lorna said, using the patchwork language they'd slowly formed, half words, half gestures. She pointed to the wound. "Poison." Kyle nodded. He knew. She brought her father's sharpest skinning knife and a bottle of whiskey stolen from Rourke Calder's private stock at the Mercantile. Outside the shack, she built a smokeless fire, heating the blade until it glowed faintly red. "This will—" she began. Pain, Cale finished for her voice grave. He uncorked the bottle, tipped it back, and drank deep 3 long, burning gulps. His throat worked, but he didn't cough. He handed it to her. She pushed it back. "No," she said softly. "It's for cleaning." A trace of a smile flickered in his eyes. "Water cleanse," he said. "Whiskey is for this." He tore a strip from his buckskin legging and handed it to her. "Bite," he said simply. She looked confused. He put it between his own teeth and clamped down. Then he lay back, eyes fixed on the cracked beams of the roof. He gave a short nod. Lorna's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the knife. "If I fail, I'll kill him." The thought gripped her throat. She steadied herself, whispered a prayer, not one from her father's sermons, but one her mother Saya had once whispered into her ear while mixing balm. Then she made the cut. Kyle's whole body arched in pain, rigid with silent agony. The groan that escaped him, muffled by leather, echoed through the shack. She worked quickly. Her fingers were slick with fresh blood, searching for the metal. It was deep pressed against a rib. She had to dig deep. Cale didn't make a sound, not a grunt, not a whimper. He lay like stone, every muscle locked in agony. Then her fingers touched it. A jagged bit of lead, misshapen and buried deep. "I've got it," Lorna whispered, breath hitching with a mix of nausea and relief. She slipped the knife beneath the metal, pried it loose. When it dropped into the tin bowl with a hollow clink, it sounded louder than a gunshot. Kyle spat the leather from his teeth, his face drenched in cold sweat. Lorna acted fast, uncorking the whiskey and pouring it straight into the open wound. This time he screamed. The sound tore through the canyon like a wounded animal. He arched off the straw-covered floor, fists clenched, then dropped back like a sack of stone unconscious. Lorna, sobbing and trembling, wrapped the wound in clean strips torn from her dress. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But it was done. He slept. Deep, restful sleep, not the fevered nightmares of before. The fire in his skin was fading. When he woke, it was already dark. A small candle flickered beside them. He sat up slow, wincing at the pain, but his eyes were sharp, clearer than they'd ever been. "You are Aspie," he said, tapping the bandage. "Brave." "I was terrified," she whispered, pulling her shawl tighter. "Brave," he said again, his voice rough, "is being scared. And doing it anyway." Then he began to speak. Even knowing she wouldn't understand most of it, he needed to tell her. He spoke with signs, broken English, and drew lines in the dirt floor of the shack. What he shared wasn't what she expected. He wasn't the kind of raider folks in Redemption Creek warned about. He was Apache Quahati, once a warrior, and meant to be more. He had been chosen to lead. But another man, Vecto Coyote, had wanted power for himself. Vecto craved war. He spoke of fire and blood, of burning every settler off the land. Cale had spoken of patience, of learning, of trade. He'd seen the railroads in the distance and knew change was coming. That made him a traitor in Vecto's eyes. The final blow came when settlers under a truce were massacred. Vecto had led it himself, then planted Kyle's spear beside the bodies. He was framed. The elders, swayed by silver lies, cast him out, declared him Totsapake, one without a people. "They hunt me," Kyle said, voice low, my own. But that wasn't all. Vecto hadn't trusted exile. He'd followed Kyle with 2 others, claiming it was to bring him back for judgment. Instead, Vecto raised his rifle and fired. Friend Kyle said bitterly, pointing to the scar. It was no wound of war, it was betrayal. Left for dead, left for the wolves. Lorna sat frozen, her heart heavy. The savage she'd been taught to fear was a man cast aside by his own people, just as she had been caged by hers. "You have no people," she said softly, pressing her hand to her own chest. He looked at her black eyes, catching the candlelight. "No," he said. Then slow and sure he reached out, not to touch her face this time, but her hand. He laced his fingers through hers. His skin was rough but warm, strong. "We are the same," he whispered. In that forgotten shack, a preacher's daughter and a banished warrior sat hand in hand, and the world outside, its rules, its hate, its judgment faded away. Back in town, Reverend Gideon Quinn clung to routine like it was gospel. 5 Monsieur Prayer. 6 a.m. Scripture. 7 a.m. Breakfast. His life had become a fortress of habit, a wall against the chaos that grief had brought years ago. But even the strongest walls crumble. His daughter was slipping through his fingers. Food was disappearing from the larder, not just bread, but his hidden brandy. She left before sunrise, came back after dark, her eyes carrying a light he hadn't seen in years. It wasn't sorrow, it was resolve, and it scared him. He blamed Rourke Calder, believed the man's relentless pursuit had pushed Lorna into rebellion. "You must be gentler with her, Mr. Calder." Gideon had warned, uneasy. Rourke had chuckled, amused. "Reverend, some fillies need a firm hand," he said, spitting tobacco. "You kept her too wild too long. A ring on her finger and a baby on her hip will settle her nerves." Gideon Quinn wasn't convinced. Not anymore. Gideon Quinn made a decision. He would follow her. But he was no man of the wild. His stiff black preacher's coat lit up like a lantern under the scorching sun, and his boots stumbled awkwardly over stone and sagebrush. Lorna, seasoned now by weeks of secrecy and careful glances over her shoulder, spotted him in minutes. She couldn't risk going near the shack, not with her father trailing her like a hound. So she played him. For 3 hours she wandered aimlessly, plucking herbs she didn't need, stopping to kneel, pretending to study plants, all the while leading him in circles across dry creek beds and thorny brush. Eventually, slick with sweat and clearly exhausted, Gideon gave up and turned back toward town. But Lorna knew it wasn't over. That was just one battle. Her father was too proud to be deterred. And worse, she wasn't alone out there. She had seen it, just a flicker on a distant ridge, the cold glint of a rifle scope. Trace Givens was out there too. They were closing in. That evening, her voice tight with urgency, Lorna turned to Kyle. "You're stronger now," she said, kneeling beside him. "Your leg, is it good?" Kyle stood, thin ribs visible, the old wound on his side, still an angry knot, but strength had begun to return. He took a few steps. "Limping, yes, but steady." "It is good," he said. "We have to go." Lorna insisted, grabbing his arm. "They know. My father. And the other man, Rourke, they're looking for us." Kyle's face darkened. He had no weapon except the knife Lorna had used to save him. No horse, no allies. Where, he asked simply. "I don't know." She admitted the weight of that truth hitting her like a blow to the chest. "North. Just away." But Kyle shook his head. "I cannot leave," he said quietly. "What?" She stared at him. "Why not?" "They'll kill you." He looked her dead in the eye. "You, your father, this man, Rourke, they will hurt you. I do not matter. We have to. You matter." He cut in, his voice suddenly fierce. He gripped her shoulders. "I will not run. Not again." His voice was thunder now. "Vecto made me run. Rourke." He tries the same. I will not. Before Lorna could speak again, they heard it. A horse iron-shod, stumbling over the rocks near the mouth of the canyon. Her blood went ice cold. Hide, she whispered. Kyle blew out the candle instantly. The shack was swallowed by darkness. He grabbed the knife and melted into the shadows against the rear wall, disappearing like smoke. Lorna stood frozen near the door, her heart hammering like a drum. Heavy steps approached, bold, deliberate. This wasn't Trace Givens creeping through the brush. This was someone making their presence known. The door creaked open. A figure filled the doorway, backlit by pale moonlight. Lorna. It was her father. Gideon Quinn stepped inside, slowly squinting into the dark. The stink of blood and whiskey lingered in the air. His eyes landed on the disturbed hay. The empty food sacks. The bottle. Lorna. His voice was tight with dread. What is this place? What sin have you brought here? His mind leapt to the conclusions he thought she'd met. A lover had fallen into temptation. Father, please, she begged, stepping in front of him. You have to leave. I will not, he boomed. I will not stand by while you throw your soul into the fire. He shoved past her, marching into the shack's center, wild with judgment. Where is he, the coward you're hiding? From the shadows. Kyle's voice cut through the dark. I am here. Gideon spun. Kyle stepped into the faint moonlight, shirtless, scarred knife in hand, his presence quiet, but formidable. To Gideon Quinn, he was the very image of the heathen savage he'd spent a lifetime preaching against. He stared face pale as ash faith cracking apart in real time. God above, he whispered. Apache. He turned to Lorna and watched her shift almost unnoticeably to stand beside Kyle. The betrayal in his eyes was raw, pure. That's the animal who slaughtered the Corwin family, who burned down homes. He didn't. Lorna shouted, tears brimming. He was dying. I helped him, like you taught me to comfort the suffering. That's not what I meant. Gideon roared, his restraint snapping. This is an abomination. You've lain with him, haven't you? No, she cried, shaking. I haven't. I talked to him. I saved his life, Lorna said, her voice shaking, but unwavering. And he's a better man than any of those sitting in your church pews. The words fell like gunshots in the cramped silence. Blasphemy plain and raw. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air seemed to flinch. Gideon Quinn stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, not as the girl he'd raised, but as a stranger. A sinner. A traitor to her blood and her God. You are no daughter of mine, he whispered, voice hollow. You're lost. You're damned. Then he turned. His steps were slow and heavy as he walked out of the shack, not looking back. Father, Lorna cried, chasing after him. Please, wait. But he kept going, stumbling away like a man already buried, back toward an empty house, toward a faith that no longer had room for mercy. She dropped to her knees, at the mouth of the canyon, sobbing. She had saved Kyle, but lost everything else. Kyle came up behind her. He didn't speak, didn't touch her. He simply stood silent and steady, his blade lowered, eyes fixed on the black horizon where the preacher had disappeared. He knew this wasn't over. That kind of man, he wouldn't stay quiet. And he was right. Gideon Quinn didn't return to the chapel. He didn't go home. He wandered blind to thorns and stone, straight to the one place in town where a man didn't have to pretend to be but righteous, the saloon. He shoved through the bat-wing doors like a ghost draped in black. The piano clanged to a halt. Cards froze in midair. Whiskey paused halfway to lips. Rourke Calder stood at the bar, drinking with his foreman, Trace Givens. Well, Reverend Rourke sneered, you lost chapels back that way. Gideon gripped the bar like it was the only thing keeping him upright. My Lorna. He choked. What about her? Rourke's grin faded. In the canyon. Old line shack. Gideon's voice cracked. With one of them. An Apache. The saloon went dead quiet. Trace's chair scraped back hard as he stood. I knew it, he muttered. Knew she was sneaking out for something. Rourke's face turned a deep, bruised red. Humiliation hit him like a sucker punch. She hadn't just rejected him, she'd chosen that. He touched her. Rourke growled, voice shaking. That animal defiled her. No, Gideon. Shouted suddenly, his protective instincts sparking too late. She was helping him. He was wounded. She was doing what's right. Rourke laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. We'll help him. He turned to Trace. Get Wes and Boone. Bring 4 ropes. 1 for the Apache, 1 for his whore, and 2 spares. Rourke, no Lorna is my, the preacher begged. Rourke backhanded him. The blow sent Gideon's sprawling lips split, cheek raw against sawdust. She's nothing now, Rourke spat. Damaged goods. And you know what we do with broken things. He spun the cylinder of his revolver, snapped it shut. Burn it. He marched out, followed by Trace, Wes Danner, and Boone Carter, guns already in hand. The saloon exploded into movement rifles pulled from behind the bar, men scrambling for their hats. This was no longer justice. This was a hunt. Gideon Quinn lay on the floor, tasting blood and regret. What have I done? He struggled to his feet and ran. Not to pray, but to steal. He burst into the livery, saddled the first horse he could reach, and kicked it into a wild, desperate gallop. Back in the canyon, Kyle was already preparing. He will tell, he said plainly. No, Lorna whispered, clinging to false hope. Not my father. He wouldn't. He is a man of his people, Cale replied softly. And fear. Fear cuts deep. He opened the rifle case, checked the chamber the way he'd watched Lorna do it time and again. Found the box of cartridges, loaded it. Then he handed the gun to her. You shoot, he said. I can't shoot a man, she said. You shoot at them, he corrected. Make thunder. I will be lightning. He held the long, skinning knife. Against rifles, it was a poor defense. But it was all he had. Then came the sound. Not 1 horse, a dozen. Charging hard, charging. They come, Cale said, voice flat and calm. He pulled Lorna back into the deepest shadows of the shack. And waited. Don't move, Cale whispered, voice low as dust. Not until I do. Then came thunder, not from the sky but from hooves. Rourke, Calder, and his men stormed into the canyon. Like a wildfire, no interest in stealth. This wasn't a rescue. This was a lynch mob. She's in there, Rourke bellowed, already off his horse. Trace, West, get inside, drag 'em both out. I want him alive. Trace Givens, grinning like the devil himself, kicked open the shack door. Come on out, redskin lover, he sneered. We got a party waitin', but the words barely left his lips. Cale exploded from the shadows like lightning off a ridge. He wasn't the fevered man they expected he was, Apache Quahati born. A warrior through and through. He ducked under Trace's rifle, driving his shoulder into the man's chest like a battering ram. The knife came up sharp and fast, buried deep beneath the ribs. Trace's eyes widened, mouth opening in stunned silence. He let out a sick gurgle as Kyle threw him from the cabin like a sack of meat. He's got a weapon, Wes Danner yelled, raising his pistol. From the cabin's dark interior, Lorna's rifle cracked a warning shot high and loud, just as Cale had taught her. The round shattered the rock above Wes's head. He screamed, dropped low, and fired blindly. Kyle moved fast, seizing Trace's fallen rifle as the shots punched holes in the shack walls. He's out, Rourke roared. Kill him. Do it now. Boone. Carter raised his shotgun, aimed to finish it. But another gun spoke first. A sharp echo rang out from the mouth of the canyon. Boone staggered his weapon, going off harmlessly into the dirt as he fell to his knees, clutching his chest. All heads turned. Atop a winded horse stood Gideon Quinn, breathless, broken, and holding a smoking revolver. "Get away from my daughter!" he roared, voice full of holy fire and heartbreak. Rourke Calder blinked. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he saw. The black-coated preacher turned against him. "You—" Rourke spat, trembling with rage. "You're damned Quinn!" And he lifted his rifle, aimed not at Cale, not at Lorna, but at the preacher. The shot landed square in Gideon's chest. He looked down, as if surprised to find the hole there. Then he toppled from the saddle like a falling cross. Father Lorna's scream tore from her like a wounded animal's cry. She ran, no hesitation, no fear, straight into the open. "Lorna!" No, Cale shouted, but it was too late. Rourke turned, smiling, rifle rising again. This was it. He would end it. Clean. But he never saw the blur coming from the side. Cale slammed into him with a warrior's cry, knocking the rifle skyward as it fired harmlessly into the stars. They hit the ground hard. Rourke was heavier, meaner, fueled by pure hatred. He clawed at Kyle's eyes, snarling, "I'll kill you. I'll kill her too." But Cale fought with a different fire, one forged from betrayal, pain, and love. He didn't fight for pride. He fought for the only person who'd never betrayed him. He ripped free the knife, but didn't let it stab. He struck with the butt of the handle, a savage blow to Rourke's temple. The rancher went limp. Cale scrambled up, seized the rifle. West, the last man standing, raised his hands. I'm just hired, mister. I got nothing to do with this." Cale leveled the rifle. "Go!" And West didn't argue. He turned tail, galloping out of the canyon like the devil was nipping at his boots. Cale ran to Lorna. She was kneeling, cradling her father's head, sobbing, her skirt soaked in blood. Gideon Quinn was still alive, barely. His breath came in wet rattles. His eyes opened, clear, steady. "Lorna!" He rasped his bloodied hand, reaching for her cheek. "I'm here," she whispered, choking back a sob. "I'm here, Pa." His eyes moved, past her, to Kyle standing over them, rifle in hand, silent and grim. The preacher's gaze didn't hold hate, only peace. "He's just a man," he whispered. His fingers twitched. "Be free, Lorna. Be free." Then his hand fell, and his eyes fixed on the stars above, and went still. Lorna Quinn let out a cry so raw, so full of grief, it echoed through the canyon like a hymn of loss. Kyle stood beside her, heart aching. He let her weep, but only for a moment. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Lorna," he said, voice like gravel. "They will come." "The whole town," Kyle said, voice firm. "We must go." Lorna looked up at him. Her face streaked with tears, her father's blood dried on her cheeks. Whatever she'd been before the preacher's daughter, the quiet shadow in Redemption Creek, she wasn't that anymore. She was no longer someone's anything. She was no one, and somehow that meant she was free. She gave a small nod. Then she bent and kissed her father's forehead, gently closing his eyes with trembling fingers. She took the rifle from Kyle without a word. He moved quickly, pulling Rourke Calder's saddlebags from the fallen bay, food, ammunition, a canteen. He took the preacher's mare and Calder's stallion, both rattled but strong. He helped Lorna mount. Rourke was stirring now, groaning in the dirt, blood drying on his temple. But Cale didn't finish him. He just left him there unarmed, broken a 6-mile crawl, back to a town that would hear every humiliating detail soon enough. That was punishment enough. Kyle swung up into the saddle and looked at Lorna, her silhouette, framed in the moonlight, rifle resting across her lap. He didn't offer comfort. He offered the truth. "This is a new life," he said. "Hard. Dangerous. Lorna straightened, her back eyes fixed west into the dark sea of Apache land. "I'm not afraid," she said. "It was a lie." "Good," Kyle replied. He reached over, took her hand in his. "We are Aspa, brave." And with that, they rode two shadows slipping out of the box canyon, leaving behind the dead, the damned, and the blood-soaked past. They vanished into the only place wild enough to take them. The first 24 hours blurred in dust and urgency. Kale spared neither the horses nor Lorna. They pushed south first, then west, carving erratic paths through scrub and ravines, doubling back, erasing tracks, never stopping long. He rode like a man who knew how close death could ride behind him. Lorna didn't speak. She just held on, her body cold, her soul colder. Her father's death played in her mind on a soundless loop, the gunfire, the blood, the way he fell. She was still wearing it, his blood dried stiff on her hands and skirt. She hadn't cried. She was afraid if she started she wouldn't stop, that she'd unravel right there on the saddle and Kyle would ride on without her, because she'd be nothing but wind-blown pieces. They made camp without a fire, tucked deep inside the shadows of a dry arroyo. Kale dismounted in one fluid move, knife already in hand, eyes scanning the dark. Then he handed her a strip of jerky from Rourke's saddlebag. She took it, but her fingers fumbled sticky with her father's blood. In the pale moonlight, she stared at her hands. "You are damned." That's what Rourke had told her. Be free. That's what her father had whispered before he died. 2 words, warring in her skull. Kyle watched her. He saw the haunted look, the blood on her dress, the stillness in her stare. He didn't speak. Instead, he knelt in front of her. Not in worship, not in pity, but with purpose. He took her hands, rough, calloused palms, closing around hers, and poured precious water from the canteen across her skin. He scrubbed gently but firmly until the blood ran off in pink streams into the dust. When her hands were clean, raw, and red, he handed her the canteen. "We sleep," he said, voice low. It wasn't a question. She nodded. And with that simple gesture, the first act of human kindness she'd known in days, her composure cracked. A single tear slipped down her cheek, carving through the grit. She didn't wipe it away. She lay down on the hard earth, rifle clutched to her chest, and dropped into a dreamless black sleep. By the 3rd day, the land began to shift. Gone were the cliffs and canyons of West Texas. In their place rose the great Llano Estacado, the staked plains, endless sky, endless grass. It stretched in every direction like the world had lost its edges. It was terrifying in its emptiness. But to Kyle it was home. His posture eased. His breath slowed. He reined the horse down to a slow walk. "We are safe," he said. "For now, they won't follow." He led them to a spring hidden in a cluster of cottonwoods, an impossible oasis in a world of dry wind and silence. "You wash," he said, handing her a small block of lye soap from the saddlebags. Then he turned his back. He walked to the edge of the grove, standing silent watch, not looking, not listening, just guarding. Lorna stepped into the cold water, let it bite into her skin. She scrubbed hard, the soap stinging her scratches. Then she looked down at her dress. The faded calico, the one she wore every Sunday, the one that once made her look like a preacher's daughter. It was torn, filthy, stained with the past. That old calico dress had once been her uniform, the ghost of Redemption Creek, the preacher's obedient shadow. Now it felt like a shroud. With sudden defiance, Lorna grabbed Kyle's skinning knife from her belt. Her movements were sharp, almost reckless. She hacked at the skirt, sawing it off until it hung ragged above her knees. She ripped the stiff collar wide open. She wasn't the preacher's daughter anymore. She was something else now. Unfamiliar, raw, alive. When she stepped out of the spring, hair slicked back, rifle in hand, Kale looked at her. He saw the tattered dress, the fire behind her eyes. He nodded once, sharp, final. The girl was gone. The woman had taken her place. They rode for a week across land as wide as any ocean. What once terrified Lorna now gave her peace. No pews, no whispers, no May Stroud, no Rourke Calder, no pulpit. Just the sky, the wind, and the man beside her. He taught her in silence, not through sermons, but through motionless and precision. Instinct. See, he said, pointing upward, not at the trail, but at a lone hawk circling. He sees water. He follows Katsu buffalo. We follow him. He showed her how to make fire without smoke using dry buffalo chips, which roots to dig, which grubs fed the body, where shadows told stories of water or danger. She taught him too. Refugee, she said one night, pointing to herself, and then to him. He tasted the word, refugee. He shook his head slowly. No. Totsapakai. What does that mean? She asked. People. With no people, he said. The ones who walk alone. I'm not alone, she whispered, looking straight at him. No, he agreed, his voice steady. We walked together. On the 10th night, they sat near their fire, the flames low. Grief still sat heavy in Lorna's chest, solid as iron. But it wasn't hollow anymore. Her father had saved her in the end, and now she owed him a life that was hers alone. Kael, she said softly, where are we going? He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. To my village, to the Kwahadi. The name that followed struck cold. Vecto, she whispered. He'll kill you. They'll kill me, he said. No fear in his voice. Yes, he added simply. Vecto made me run. I won't run again. I must tell my story. He turned to her. His eyes were deep and firelit. A man is his story. Without it, he's nothing. His voice softened. You, Lorna, you are Waipu, a white woman. It is dangerous. They will see you as a captive, or a slave, or a prize. Vecto, he will use you to wound me. Lorna stared into the coals. She thought of Rourke Calder, of the cruel stares in town of the righteous women, whispering behind her back. She'd never been free, not once. I've always been a captive, she said flatly. Back there, they'd hang me, for Trace Givens, for my father. I'm a traitor to them. She looked up. Out here, I'm just white. Cale met her gaze. He saw the steel in her spine and he honored it. No, he said, voice steady. You will not be a captive. He reached into a small deerskin pouch tied to his belt, the only thing besides his knife he still had. From it he pulled a cord of leather, rough and worn. Attached to it was a red-tailed hawk feather, sharp perfect, and a smooth stone deep blue like the night before a storm. This was my mother's, he said, his voice roughening for the first time. Her name was Alani. She gave it to me. For my kitty. My wife. Lorna's breath caught. This wasn't a proposal, not the way girls dreamed. There were no flowers, no ring, no kneeling, just meaning, purpose, and truth. Kael. He stopped her, not with touch, but with eyes. In my world, woman alone is nothing, man alone is nothing. You cannot be Waipu. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper of wind. You must be Kwahadi. He didn't ask. He acted. He lifted the leather cord and tied it gently around her neck. The stone, still warm from his hand, settled into the hollow of her throat. It felt heavy around her neck, like something ancient and rooted. This is my word, Kael said quietly, his thumb brushing over the hawk feather. This stone is the sky. The feather is the hawk. He sees truth. This tells them, you are mine. His voice held no pride, only certainty. You are under my protection. You are Kitty, wife of Kale the sun. To harm you is to declare war on me. Lorna looked down at the totem that now hung against her chest. Simple, powerful. It wasn't just a charm. It was a shield, a mark, a promise. She thought of Rourke Calder's ring, cold, lifeless gold, meant to bind her in silence. This was different. This meant belonging. She lifted her gaze, staring at the man in front of her, not just an Apache warrior, not just a fugitive. He had once been her patient. Now, he was her only ally. He had given her more than protection. He'd given her a name, a people, a reason. She reached for his hand, still resting on her shoulder. "And I," she said fiercely, voice firm as iron, "won't just be your shield." Her fingers brushed the knife at her belt. "I'll be your blade." A rare, quiet smile crossed Kael's face, slow and reverent. He saw her now, truly. He saw the girl who'd fired at wolves, the woman who'd carved a bullet from his flesh, the daughter who had watched her father fall to save her, the survivor, the flame. "We'll be strong," he said. The next morning, Lorna Quinn didn't ride out as the preacher's daughter. She rode as Lorna Kale. Not just a name, a choice. She didn't know what waited over the ridgeline, whether Vecto crouched in the shadows, whether the Quahati would welcome her or drive her away. She didn't know if she'd live long enough to see the first bloom of spring. But her grief, it wasn't an anchor anymore. It had become a whetstone. She looked west into the endless heart of Apache territory. Kyle rode beside her, the wind tugging his dark hair, his face calm, his purpose clear. He wasn't just an Apache anymore. He was her husband. Lorna breathed in the raw, untamed air. She was terrified. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was the true story of the American frontier. A story carved in grit, forged in survival, and shaped by the impossible choices that build a life. Theirs wasn't an ending. It was the start of something fierce and uncertain. Two outcasts building a world from nothing, finding their only tribe in each other. If this story of survival, forbidden love, and fierce redemption struck a chord with you, let us know. Like this video to show your support. Share it with someone who loves a real Western tale, gritty, raw, and unforgettable. Subscribe and ring the bell because we have many more stories from the forgotten corners of the frontier, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for riding with us. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.